Here's your rewritten version in the tone and style you wanted. The golden yellow of the streetlights cast long shadows across the deserted diner parking lot as Jessica Mercer secured for the evening. It was the last minute of midnight on October 17th, 2000, and a soft autumn rain pattered on the roof of her blue Honda Civic as she eased into the driver's seat. At 28, her auburn hair tied back in a sensible ponytail and her eyes holding both exhaustion and determination, Jessica was known as someone who could be relied upon, someone who always showed up. "See you tomorrow, Jess," her colleague called out, taking cover under an umbrella. "Bright and early," Jessica responded with a yawn and a warm smile as she began the car. She turned on the radio. The soft sounds of an acoustic guitar filled the still streets of Bloomington as she drove away. The dashboard clock glowed 12:14 a.m. Her babysitter was likely half asleep on the couch, TV humming in the background, while her 4-year-old daughter, Lily, was asleep in bed, still holding the stuffed bunny Jessica had made herself. That evening, Jessica Mercer did not come home. At 1:30 a.m., the babysitter had called police. By dawn, Jessica's name was on local television reports. By dusk, her smiling face was posted on storefronts and telephone poles throughout Monroe County. Her car was missing, her purse, her keys, her wallet. Her life appeared to have disappeared. For 25 long years, her case would remain in a file labeled unsolved, being dusted off, while her daughter grew up without a mother and the killer roamed free. But this story isn't just another crime case. It's about relentless determination. It's about family bonds that refuse to break, even under the weight of time and tragedy. And it's about the technology and perseverance that finally brought justice a quarter century later. Before we dive deeper into this remarkable case, take a moment to click that subscribe button and notification bell. Cold cases such as Jessica's are being cracked daily due to committed investigators and innovative technology. And you won't want to miss a single one of these instances when justice is finally served. And I have to ask, where are you watching today? Share it in the comments. I enjoy seeing how far these tales of courage and justice reach. Bloomington, Indiana, in the year 2000 was a contradictory place. It hosted Indiana University and had a mix of small-town Midwestern niceness with the dynamism of a college town. Violent crime was uncommon, so when it did occur, everyone's sense of security was shaken. Neighbors knew neighbors, and doors were left open, allowing neighbors to help neighbors. Jessica Mercer's vanishing broke that trust. Parents escorted their children to bus stops. Women carried pepper spray. College students stayed together at night. Here was a young single mother working the late shifts to raise her daughter, and suddenly vanished. And the community felt exposed in a way they never had before. The police were stumped. There was no body, no crime scene. Her car had disappeared, as if into the darkness. All that was left were a missing mother, a daughter who stayed behind, and agonizing questions lingering in the air like mist. Who would harm Jessica? Where was she? Was she somewhere alive? Or had something horrific occurred on those rain-soaked Bloomington streets? Days became weeks. Weeks became months. And as the years went by, the case grew colder, slipping from public consciousness. Nearly everyone forgot, save two women who never forgot: Jessica's mother, Eleanor, and her sister, Rachel. And then in 2025, 25 years after that stormy October evening, their determination would ultimately bear fruit, uncovering a truth that would stun an entire community. Jessica Ann Mercer was born on March 12, 1972, in Bloomington, Indiana, to Robert and Eleanor Mercer. She lived on the east side of town in a small 2-bedroom house with her younger sister Rachel. Jessica was practical, stubborn, and quietly tough from a young age. A young woman who appeared to be fated to charge straight at life's problems. Former classmates from Bloomington High School North remember Jessica as bright and thoughtful, the kind of student who preferred curling up with a good book over attending parties. She graduated in 1990 with honors, yet she turned down college scholarships to care for her father, who had been diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. Jessica always put other people first, her mother, Eleanor Mercer, would later explain to the press. Even as a teenager, she had a sense of responsibility most adults never acquire. After her father passed away in 1992, Jessica took on a series of retail jobs to help her mother with finances. It was during her time as a cashier at Walden Books that she met Dustin Harmon, a graduate student studying literature at Indiana University. Their whirlwind romance led to marriage in 1994, and in 1996, they welcomed their daughter Lily. But the marriage was rocky from the start. Friends reported that Dustin anticipated Jessica's backing of his educational aspirations, in addition to Lily's upbringing, but he did not contribute much financially or emotionally. Court documents indicate an acrimonious divorce in 1998 as Jessica battled for sole custody of her 2-year-old daughter. Dustin even threatened to relocate to Chicago for a teaching job, not because he actually wanted to be with Lily, Rachel Mercer said, but in order to punish Jessica for making a choice without him. Jessica retained primary custody, though the legal struggles exhausted her reserves. In 2000, she was working 2 jobs, receptionist for a neighborhood dental office during the day and waitress at Mabel's Diner 3 evenings a week. Co-workers remembered that, even with the grueling schedule, Jessica complained very little. 6 months prior to her vanishing, Jessica started dating Michael Lawson, a mechanic at the car repair shop where she brought in her old Honda for service. Michael was a bit crude but kind, having a small criminal record, a 1995 DUI and a charge of disorderly conduct that was later dropped. He would frequently assist with Lily sitting for the evening shift. Those final months had looked brighter for Jessica. Diane Kemp, who supervised Jessica at the dental clinic, said that Jessica was mentioning that she was going to return to school, perhaps to pursue a degree in nursing. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just barely making it, she was looking ahead. October 16, 2000, the evening before she disappeared, was just another day for Jessica. She dropped off Lily at preschool at 8:15 a.m., worked at the dental clinic until 4:30 p.m. Echoman, then picked up her daughter and prepared dinner in their small South Roger Street apartment. At 6:45 p.m., 19-year-old neighbor Amber Wilson stopped by to babysit while Jessica went on to work her evening shift at Mabel's Diner. Amber went on to inform police that Jessica appeared preoccupied that night. She kept checking her cell phone several times, something she never did. When Amber asked what was wrong, Jessica merely shrugged and replied that she was tired, perhaps taking an additional shift that weekend. Security cameras captured Jessica arriving at Mabel's at about 7 p.m. She waited on customers, took tips, and at about 10:30 p.m., she made a telephone call that visibly disturbed her. She requested a 5-minute break, according to her manager, when she returned. She was quieter than normal, but she continued working professionally, closing out her shift. Jessica checked out at 12:06 a.m. on October 17th. The security camera filmed her walking to her car, looking back over her shoulder twice before entering the vehicle. That was the last documented sighting of Jessica Mercer. By 1:30 a.m., she had not come home. Amber became worried. The drive between Mabel's and Jessica's apartment typically took no longer than 15 minutes. After calling Jessica's cell phone repeatedly without getting an answer, Amber reported the incident to the police at 1:47 a.m. Officer Thomas Reynolds was the responding officer, arriving at Jessica's apartment at 2:12 a.m. His first report mentioned that, although troubling, adults missing for fewer than 24 hours infrequently initiated an immediate investigation. Here's your rephrased version with the requested tone and style. Nevertheless, Officer Reynolds took down the basic details and promised to circulate Jessica's description and vehicle information to patrol officers. Meanwhile, Amber called Eleanor Mercer, who arrived at the apartment within half an hour and took over caring for a sleeping Lily. By dawn, Eleanor and Rachel were ringing up hospitals, phoning Jessica's friends, and even calling her ex-husband Dustin, who had said he was in Indianapolis at a literary conference. The morning dragged on with no news about Jessica, and Eleanor was adamant about making a formal report of her missing person. Detective Sarah Monahan was called in on the case. Based on Jessica's past as a responsible, loving mother and the unprecedented circumstances, leaving her child with a babysitter overnight without a word, Monahan elevated the case to possible abduction by mid-afternoon. "We just knew something was amiss right away," Rachel Mercer said later to the press. "Jessica would not leave Lily, never, for anything. When she didn't call, didn't answer her phone, we knew that someone had picked her up. The public response was rapid and massive. By October 18th, a group of more than 200 volunteers had organized search parties, combing through forests near Bloomington and distributing hundreds of flyers bearing Jessica's photo. Local businesses were not idle. A print shop cranked out thousands of posters, and a pizza parlor nourished late-shift volunteers. But the police were initially hampered. Jessica's blue Honda Civic was nowhere to be found, and traffic cameras revealed no indication of it having left Bloomington. Her final cell phone call, recorded at 10:31 p.m. on October 16th, had been made from a payphone that could not be tracked. And the rain during that evening had washed away potential clues in the diner parking lot. Detective Monahan first looked at Jessica's ex-husband, Dustin, and her current boyfriend, Michael. Both had alibis. Dustin's co-workers corroborated that he had been attending the conference, and Michael reported that he was at home watching TV, but had no witnesses. "We had a missing woman, a missing car, and not much else to work with," Monahan would later say. "In most cases, you have a crime scene, physical evidence. In this case, we had nothing but questions." A search of Jessica's apartment yielded nothing. No indication that she intended to depart. Her passport was stored in a drawer, clothes were hung in the closet, and a shopping list for the week ahead was still taped to the refrigerator. Her bank accounts reflected no atypical activity, and her credit cards were never touched. For Eleanor and Rachel, the initial week following Jessica's disappearance was a blur of police questioning, mobilizing search parties, and tending to 4-year-old Lily, who didn't grasp why her mother had vanished. How do you tell a child that her mother is missing? Eleanor would remember years later, her voice cracking. How do you respond when she asks mommy if she doesn't love her anymore? Those first few days, there are no words for that kind of hurt. Rachel also took a leave of absence from her teaching career in order to relocate with her mother and niece. "We had to keep going," she said, "for Lily. But it was as if we were moving underwater, as if everything was in slow motion. We'd find ourselves holding our breaths whenever the telephone rang. As weeks turned into days with no leads, the first burst of community support started to flag. Search parties dwindled. Media interest died down. Police resources were slowly transferred to other cases. But Eleanor and Rachel never lost hope. They put up new flyers every weekend, made daily calls to detectives, and reassured Lily that they would never give up searching for her mother. "Not knowing was the worst," Rachel said to a film crew many years later. "If we had seen her body, at least then we could have mourned. Instead, we existed in this awful limbo, hoping Jessica was alive somewhere, but dreading what she might be going through." By Christmas of 2000, the case of Jessica Mercer had slid from front pages to a minor entry in the year's Unsolved Crime Summary. Here's your rephrased version with the requested tone and style. For most of Bloomington, life slowly returned to normal. But for the Mercer family, normal would never exist again. As the initial 72 hours lapsed, the key window for missing person investigations, the Bloomington police broadened the inquiry, hiring 3 detectives to assist Detective Sarah Monahan. A specific command post was established in a conference room at police headquarters. The walls were adorned with pictures of Jessica, Bloomington maps indicating search grid areas, and timelines detailing her final days. Naturally, the investigation focused on the 2 men closest to Jessica, her ex-husband Dustin Harmon and her boyfriend Michael Lawson. Dustin Harmon appeared the embodiment of the academic, articulate, measured, and apparently helpful. He was 33, having finally landed a tenure-track teaching position in the English department at Indiana University after years of adjuncting and graduate school. His colleagues found him brilliant but frosty, someone who wore an aura of intellectual superiority. He talked about Jessica as if she were a figure in one of his literary critiques. Detective Monahan documented in her case notes, detached, clinical, speaking of their relationship in terms of storylines and necessary outcomes as opposed to feelings. The investigation on Dustin unveiled a pattern of controlling behavior within their marriage. His finances indicated that he had kept sole control over their joint accounts, even though he contributed very little. Emails from his computer that were recovered from Jessica's computer had extensive criticisms of her parenting, looks, and intellect. Most disturbing was a letter in Jessica's own files, where Dustin wrote that he would use his college contacts to ensure that she would never be accepted into a college program should she seek full custody of Lily. He armed her insecurities, Rachel Mercer afterwards informed investigators. Jessica quit college in order to take care of our ailing father. Dustin reminded her daily that she was only a high school graduate and he had his master's. He made her feel fortunate he had selected her. Against all these tendencies, Dustin's alibi for the evening of Jessica's disappearance was strong. Conference attendance records showed he checked in at the Literary Symposium in Indianapolis at 7 p.m. on October 16th. Hotel security footage confirmed he entered his room at 11:37 p.m. and did not leave until 8:15 a.m. the next morning. The drive from Indianapolis to Bloomington takes roughly 1 hour and 15 minutes, making it seemingly impossible for him to have been involved in Jessica's disappearance around midnight. We couldn't crack his alibi, Detective Monahan later conceded, but there was something about him that never felt right. He was almost smiling at the publicity the case afforded him. Michael Lawson was a stark contrast to Dustin's well-groomed, scholar-like attitude. At 34 years old, with calloused hands and simple manners, Lawson had been an auto mechanic since he dropped out of high school. His small apartment above the garage where he worked was sparely equipped, but tightly neat. While his minor criminal record initially raised concerns, his colleagues described him as hardworking and honest. "Mike's the guy who stays late to finish a job without charging extra," one employer told police. "He's rough around the edges, sure, but he's got a good heart." When he was interviewed, Lawson was obviously shaken, catching his breath repeatedly. "She was turning things around," he said to the detectives, voice cracking. "We were going to get a house one day, me and her, something with a backyard for Lily." Jessica did deserve that. However, Lawson's alibi had issues. He claimed to have been home alone watching Monday Night Football after Jessica left for work. Phone records showed he had called her cell at 10:31 p.m. The same call witnesses at the diner said upset her. Lawson insisted it was just a routine goodnight call, something they had done often. "Here's your rephrased version with the requested tone and style. I said I loved her," Lawson told his third interview. "That's the last thing I ever did say to her." Since there were no witnesses to back up his whereabouts from 10:31 p.m. until police interviewed him at 5:20 a.m. the following morning, Michael Lawson was still a suspect. But searches of his apartment, office, and car produced nothing to connect him with Jessica's vanishing act. As the probe went on, authorities investigated other scenarios: random kidnapping, a diner patron with an unhealthy obsession, even that she had faked her own disappearance to avoid continued battles with her former husband. Each avenue was pursued relentlessly, only to come to a dead end. Search parties combed through deserted properties, forests, and bodies of water within a 30-mile circle of Bloomington. Divers searched quarries and hazardous swim holes sprinkled throughout the area. Cadaver canines patrolled secluded hiking trails. Volunteers trudged grid patterns across cornfields and forests. The missing blue Honda Civic was the focus of a multi-state bulletin. But none of these proved fruitful. The forensic capabilities of 2000 created significant challenges. DNA testing, as it existed, was slow and expensive, most often reserved for homicide cases with physical evidence. Without a crime scene or recovered materials, this wasn't possible. Cell phone tracking was present, but in its beginning stages. Investigators could only view general location information from tower connection, not the precise GPS tracking we now assume. "We could tell her phone last pinged near the diner," former Bloomington Police Chief Walter Davis explained in a 2023 interview. "But that just confirmed what we already knew. She'd been at work. Once the phone was turned off, or the battery died, we were blind." Surveillance cameras in 2000 were limited and pixeled. Mabel's diner footage tracked Jessica out, but it couldn't capture license plates of other cars or show clear pictures of faces outside the entrance. There were only 3 traffic cameras in Bloomington at the time, none placed to record Jessica's path home. Computer forensics was still in its infancy. When police searched Jessica's home computer, local software and computing power were not able to restore deleted files or read browsing habits as investigators do today. Social media, which could have provided clues to her relationships or mood, did not exist in a usable form. "We were using stone knives and naked skins versus what detectives have now," Detective Monahan said years later. "We did the best we could with what we had, but that technology lag taunts me when I think of what we may have overlooked. As winter fell over Bloomington, the case hardened as cold as the countryside. By December, heavy snows ended outdoor searches, obscuring possible evidence under drifts of ice and frozen earth. The harsh Indiana winter, temperatures dipping into single digits, snowdrifts piling against search party vehicles, seemed like a symbol of the ever-hardening case. Public reaction changed as weeks went by. Early shock and solidarity were replaced with rumor and speculation. Anonymous calls deluged the police tip line, the majority of which went nowhere but wasted precious resources. Local media coverage started devolving into sensationalism, with one newspaper publishing the following headline: "Mother disappears, scandalous love, triangle," in spite of no apparent basis for such an assertion. Bellowing internet message boards became hotbeds for armchair detectives, dissecting the little available public information ad nauseum. Some discussions grew accusatory, and unfounded allegations against both Dustin Harmon and Michael Lawson circulated widely. Here's your rephrased version with the requested tone and style. People wanted answers so badly that some began creating their own. "We couldn't accept that sometimes things happen that don't make sense, that can't be neatly wrapped up," Rachel Mercer later explained. But even as speculation ran rampant and official resources grew scarce, a nucleus of citizen supporters held firm. Jessica's former colleagues established an education trust fund for Lily. Neighbors coordinated meal delivery to Eleanor Mercer's doorstep. A local printer persisted in making missing persons posters at no cost. As the year 2000 came to a close, the official investigation was still technically ongoing, but symbolically so. Absent new evidence, investigators were able only to re-question known witnesses and wait for that breakthrough now seemingly unlikely. By March 2001, half a year after Jessica disappeared, daily briefings at the Bloomington Police Department had slowed to weekly updates. By summer, they became monthly status reports, each providing less and less to report. The conference room that had once hummed with maps, timelines, and a sense of urgency was slowly emptied out, repurposed for other pressing investigations. Detective Sarah Monahan, once the lead on a team of 4 detectives, worked the case whenever she could steal time from fresh assignments. The shift wasn't made public. It just occurred quietly, as cold cases tend to, without closure, but with resources shifted quietly. "There's this false impression that investigators lose interest," Monahan said years later. "We never lose interest. But without new information, without witnesses, without a crime scene or a body, we come to the point where we've pursued every avenue available." The investigation had stalled due to several related reasons. First, and most profoundly, an absence of physical evidence. With neither Jessica's body nor her car, forensic examination was out of the question. Rain the night of her disappearance had washed away possible evidence in the diner parking lot. The changes of a fall in an Indiana autumn, leaves on the ground, gusty winds, temperature changes, probably ruined any evidence that may have been out of doors. Second, the 2 main individuals of interest, Dustin Harmon and Michael Lawson, had already been thoroughly questioned and investigated with no actionable evidence generated. Dustin's alibi stood firm after being repeatedly questioned. Michael, while having no fully verifiable alibi, had been completely cooperative with numerous raids on his home and workplace. Without evidence linking either man to the disappearance of Jessica, police couldn't reach the legal requirements for arrests or further search warrants. Third, the thousands of tips generated had been mostly dead ends. Each demanded documentation, follow-up, and eventual elimination. Mountains of paperwork but no solutions. Fourth, jurisdictional issues presented procedural problems. With no sense of where Jessica could have been abducted, or even if she had left on her own, no one knew what agencies needed to be engaged. Though her details were input into the National Missing Person databases, the case was left largely in the hands of the Bloomington Police Department, which restricted available resources. Lastly, technology of the early 2000s presented almost insurmountable hurdles. Digital forensics barely existed. DNA testing was time-consuming and costly. The networked databases that enabled today's investigators to quickly cross-check information simply didn't exist. "We were stuck in investigative limbo," Chief Davis confessed later. "Too many unknowns, too few resources, and a case that grew colder with each passing day." By the one-year anniversary of Jessica's disappearance in October 2001, media coverage had changed dramatically. What had once been front-page news with daily updates was now an occasional human interest story, usually framed around milestone dates or Eleanor and Rachel Mercer's continued search efforts. Here's your rephrased version with the requested tone and style. Local channels that used to send reporters to daily police briefings now produced occasional cold case segments with Jessica's narrative and others in passing. A reminder of unresolved enigmas instead of ongoing news. These segments got shorter and less common over the years, being aired only on anniversary months or when the family had public events. Print media also followed this path. Daily coverage became weekly, weekly became monthly, and monthly became yearly. Reporters who had been thoroughly covered in Jessica's case were moved to other assignments, and newly assigned reporters writing anniversary stories did not know the inside story of the investigation. They simply rehashed the general facts without the background and context that could have sustained public interest. The September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks created a major watershed. National tragedy filled headlines and drove local cases, like Jessica's, still further from the public mind. When stories did appear, they were presented nostalgically, histories presented rather than ongoing reports. Individuals recalled headlines, not breaking news. Public interest followed the media. Search parties of volunteers who had numbered in the hundreds reduced to a few dozen, then to family and very close friends. Tip lines that had been manned 24 hours a day were cut back to voicemail that was checked sporadically. Posters of Jessica's image, once seen everywhere in Bloomington, grew worn and faded, seldom replaced except by Eleanor and Rachel themselves. "It's like seeing someone die twice," Eleanor Mercer said to a reporter 3 years after her daughter vanished. "First, Jessica disappears, and then her memory just begins to slip out of the public eye. People forget. They move on. But we can't. We won't." For the Mercer family, the transition from active investigation to cold case status was tragic on many levels. In addition to the pain of having their loved one still missing, they had the burden of keeping her case alive, both with law enforcement and in the public's eye. Eleanor, who had retired early from nursing to devote herself to caring for Lily on a full-time basis, devoted herself to two functions: raising her granddaughter and locating her daughter. She transformed the dining room of her little house into what she referred to as Jessica's war room, carefully sorting case files, photos, timelines, and communiques with the police. "Mom turned amateur sleuth," Rachel described. "She read every investigative book she could get her hands on, learned legalese, read up on comparable cases and how they were cracked. She reinvented herself as an advocate, not only for Jessica, but for all missing persons." Rachel combined her teaching profession with an unofficial position as public representative of the family. She developed connections with media reporters, hosted yearly awareness campaigns, and later produced a website devoted to Jessica's case. She kept it updated with any news, no matter how minor, and networked with other families of missing persons for advice and support. Perhaps most agonizing for both women was observing Lily mature and come to increasingly comprehend the truth about her mother's disappearance. The toddler who regularly inquired, "When is Mommy coming home?" became a teenager grappling with more sophisticated questions. By the age of 10, Lily realized that her mother may never return. At 15, she was going to awareness campaigns with her grandmother and aunt, her face a haunting reminder of the woman on missing person flyers. "We guaranteed Lily that we'd never ever lie to her about Jessica," Eleanor said, "but we guaranteed we'd never lose hope. Those vows sometimes cross each other out, particularly as years go by. How do you keep hope alive without rejecting reality?" Jessica Mercer's case was typical of a disturbing trend in missing persons cases across the country. A tale not only of a missing person, but of the far-reaching ripple effects that course through family, community, and time. Here's your rewritten version with the desired tone and style. Based on FBI records at the time, approximately 800,000 individuals went missing in the United States annually. While most of them were later found to be safe, thousands of others went missing for the long term, their cases ultimately going cold despite originally extensive inquiries. The statistics told some uncomfortable truths. Cases of white women generally garnered more media coverage and investigative resources than cases of people of color. Cases with obvious evidence of foul play tended to get further than puzzling disappearances, such as Jessica's, whose lack of a crime scene presented major investigative challenges. And small jurisdictions, such as Bloomington, tended to have fewer resources than large cities, which could draw upon specialized units and high-tech tools. Jessica's case wasn't the only one to go cold, said Dr. Harold Renfrew, a criminologist who has written about missing persons cases. What was unusual, he said, was her family's exceptional tenacity in keeping the case alive despite overwhelming odds. If you have managed to stick with us so far in the life of Jessica, you learned something about perseverance. Eleanor and Rachel Mercer never gave up seeking answers, not even when it appeared that the entire world had. Their perseverance teaches us that certain ties cannot be severed by time or situation. Hit subscribe now and become part of our community committed to keeping the focus on cold cases such as Jessica's. Your subscription helps these stories not be forgotten and could even bring closure to families still seeking answers. Have you ever met someone who demonstrated this sort of unshakable dedication to an endeavor? Leave your comments below. As the years went by, from 2001 to 2002 and later, birthdays Jessica never had, holidays she never knew, and milestones in Lily's life she never saw continued to dot the calendar. Officially, her disappearance was categorized as a cold case, a bureaucratic term reflecting the heartbreaking reality confronting thousands of families across the country. A world in which questions outnumber answers, hope battles chance, and left-behinds have to learn to exist with uncertainty akin to an open wound that refuses to close. But cold cases have one more characteristic. They are never closed. Occasionally, years down the line, when technology takes another leap, memories surface, or conscience is too overpowering, the truth comes out. While Jessica Mercer's case fell out of headlines and police priority lists, Eleanor and Rachel went through a change that neither expected. The reserved private family, Eleanor, a retired nurse, and Rachel, a middle school teacher of English, became vocal advocates not only for Jessica, but for missing persons across the country. "We had a decision to make," Eleanor said in an interview in 2010. "We could either accept that the system did the best it could, or we could become the system Jessica required. We took the latter option." Their organizing started small, keeping a special phone line open for tips, refreshing faded flyers in Bloomington, and meeting every month with whoever at the police department would still hear them out. But when they started networking with other families of missing persons, their efforts expanded both in scale and ingenuity. By 2003, Eleanor had taken private investigation methods online courses. Although not a licensed private investigator, she acquired useful skills in interviewing, keeping records, and evidence procurement. She became a member of national family organizations of the missing, attending conventions where investigators presented investigative tactics and emotional comfort. Rachel, on the other hand, leveraged her experience as a teacher to craft educational modules for missing persons cases. She made presentations suitable for children in local schools, instructing them in safety procedures while sensitively bringing attention to her sister's case. Below is your revised version with the desired tone and style. Her classroom experience made Rachel a natural orator, and soon she became the family spokesperson. "Rachel could get people to listen when they'd prefer to turn away," said Margaret Wilson, who went on to establish a support group for families of missing individuals after getting to know the Mercers. She had that teacher's talent for commanding attention and making Jessica's story relevant to strangers. In October 2002, the second anniversary of Jessica's vanishing, the Mercers hosted their first official remembrance ceremony, a candlelight vigil outside Bloomington's Courthouse Square. Some 50 people huddled quietly in the fall breeze as Rachel recited a poem she had penned for her sister. That vigil was repeated annually, growing over time. By the 5th anniversary, it involved an awareness walk along downtown Bloomington. By the 10th, representatives from law enforcement and victim advocacy organizations participated, pulling participants from all over Indiana and receiving regional press coverage. "The anniversaries were always the hardest days," Eleanor revealed, "but turning our grief into public action gave those days meaning. We weren't just remembering Jessica, we were fighting for her." Arguably, the most influential effort was establishing Jessica's Day in area elementary schools, celebrated every May around her birthday. Initially, these were brief presentations on individual safety that over time evolved into a lesson plan on caring for the community, including art and writing activities intended to educate children without scaring them. It extended across Monroe County, so even as years went by, there were always new generations of Bloomington citizens who knew Jessica's name and the circumstances under which she died. Raised in this atmosphere of activism, Lily began accompanying her grandmother and aunt to events as soon as she could comprehend. By the time she was a teenager, she had developed into a formidable orator herself, a living testament of everything that Jessica had been denied. I have no recollections of my mother, Lily stated at the 15th anniversary vigil, her voice firm considering the gravity of her words. Everything I do know about her is through stories, pictures, and the way my aunt and grandmother have kept her alive in me. I'm not looking for answers to what happened. I'm looking for the fragments of myself who disappeared when she did. The Mercers' efforts at private investigation complemented their public campaign. After exhausting official avenues, they moved on to alternatives that the police either were not able to or had given up on as being fruitless. In 2004, they retained their first private investigator, a retired Indianapolis detective with expertise in cold cases. Although his 3-month probe turned up nothing new, he reorganized the case files and recognized several witnesses who had not been properly interviewed in the original investigation. 2 years on, a true crime TV show were interested in including Jessica's case. The Mercers seized the moment to pay for another private investigation. This time, the investigation included a forensic psychologist who used offender profiling methods not previously explored. The private investigations gave us direction when we felt lost, Rachel said. Even when they didn't give us answers, they provided us with new questions to ask, new avenues to pursue. Eleanor's war room grew with each inquiry. Timelines, photos, and maps filled the walls, covered with colored pins marking potential sightings, search zones, and areas of note. What had started as a bereaved mother's frantic accumulation had become a highly refined case file, impressive even to seasoned investigators. What time is it where you're watching? While most of the world slept, this family spent countless sleepless nights searching for answers, reviewing files by lamplight, following every lead, and measuring their determination, not in hours, but in years of relentless pursuit. Here's your rephrased version with the requested tone and style. Community support for the Mercers evolved over the decades. As vigils evolved, however, more and more attendees had no personal acquaintance with Jessica. A new generation of sympathizers inspired by the family's refusal to give up, or by their own experience as victims of missing persons. Local companies that had originally contributed supplies because they knew Jessica eventually supported the cause because they knew Eleanor and Rachel. The owner of Bloomington Print Shop, having given free posters way back in 2000, carried on the tradition even after his retirement, teaching his replacement to continue the tradition. The local coffee house where the Mercers met every month for their Justice for Jessica gatherings reserved their table year-round with a small sign. Even newer generations of Bloomington police officers, some of whom were children when Jessica vanished, learned about her case as part of training. Although official resources were still limited, individual officers frequently spent free time reading case files or tracking down tips from the Mercer hotline. This community never fully forgot. People left, new people arrived, businesses changed owners, but in some way Jessica was still part of Bloomington's consciousness, Eleanor said on the 20th anniversary in 2020. Not necessarily at the forefront perhaps, but never completely away. The Mercers' dedication at a personal cost. Eleanor's physical health suffered from the strain of raising Lily while keeping the investigation going. Rachel put off marriage and starting her own family. The two women also shared the chaotic grief that accompanies ambiguous loss, to be unable to bring closure without knowing the fate of Jessica. Still, year after year, anniversary after anniversary, they stayed on, converting private sorrow into public mission and declining to let Jessica's case be another dusty folder full of unsolved enigmas. The early 21st century dawned with a forensic revolution that revolutionized criminal investigations all over the globe. What was the stuff of science fiction in 2000 was routine procedure by 2025. DNA testing, which had once needed quarter-size samples, now could be done on samples undetectable to the human eye. Digital forensics went from simple file recovery to advanced algorithms that could rebuild deleted data on various platforms. Cellular technology progressed from coarse tower-based triangulation to precise locations within meters. These advances in technology proved a profound truth. No evidence ever really goes away. It just waits for the appropriate technology to bring it out. For cold cases such as Jessica Mercer's, this revolution provided new hope. Throughout the nation, cases inactive for decades were reopened as evidence stored away uncovered secrets that had been out of reach for investigators in the past. What is making cold cases solvable today isn't always new evidence, said Dr. Amelia Richardson, director of the Midwest Forensic Science Center. It's new eyes looking at old evidence through new technology. The clues were always there. We just couldn't read them before. In January 2025, the Bloomington Police Department initiated a thorough examination of cold cases within a statewide cold case project that had received funding from a federal grant. A dedicated team of veteran detectives, forensic technicians, and digital analysis specialists began going through the cases methodically that had gone cold but still had a lot of evidence. The disappearance of Jessica Mercer, technically open but actually dormant, was one of the very first cases they worked on. Cold case squad leader, Detective Marcus Washington, had a personal stake in pursuing her case. As a new officer in 2000, he'd been part of the first group of responders to search wooded tracts near Bloomington in the days following her disappearance. Now on the verge of retirement, he viewed an opportunity to finally close the case that had long plagued his career. I can recall Eleanor and Rachel Mercer walking those search lines with us, Washington said. 2 years later, they were still searching. If technology could provide answers for them now, I wanted to make that happen. The cold case unit started by scanning all 25 pages of the 25-year-old case. Thousands of leads, reports, and interviews. With powerful text analysis software, they sifted through the documents, finding patterns and inconsistencies that human reviewers would have overlooked. The system highlighted inconsistent witness statements and highlighted relationship between individuals who had not been adequately investigated. Concurrently, they went over the limited physical evidence retained from the initial inquiry. Details gathered in Jessica's apartment, hairbrushes, toothbrushes, clothing, had never been analyzed using contemporary methods. They sent these in for advanced DNA profiling, establishing a full genetic profile of Jessica, which could now be matched against unidentified remains across the country. But the breakthrough was from an unlikely source. A minutia that had appeared inconsequential to the initial probe, now revolutionized by advanced technology. In 2000, detectives had obtained security camera tape from stores along the probable route home from the diner for Jessica. Much of it was fuzzy, indistinct, and produced nothing useful. One tape, a tape from a gas station just 2 blocks from Mabel's diner, had been listed as containing no relevant content and stored away. Using AI-enhanced video restoration technology, originally developed for astronomical imagery, technicians reprocessed all available footage. The gas station video, nearly unwatchable in its original form, revealed something extraordinary. I remember the exact moment, said Eliza Kimura, the forensic video specialist who made the discovery. I'd been staring at enhanced frames for hours when suddenly, there it was, something everyone had missed for 25 years. In the corner of the frame, barely visible for less than 3 seconds, appeared a partial reflection in the gas station window. The reflection revealed a blue car consistent with the description of Jessica's Honda Civic arriving at the back of the lot at 12:22 a.m., 16 minutes after she had finished work. And most significantly, there was another car right behind hers, a dark-colored SUV that had never been mentioned before in any investigation report. This 16-minute window became the subject of particularly diligent inquiry. It took only 5 minutes to drive from the gas station to the diner. Why had she stopped there on the way home when she didn't normally take her route past that place? Had she been tailed from the diner, or had she stopped there to meet someone? The investigators went back to the phone records of Jessica using advanced tools to raw data stored in the original case file. In 2000, the detectives had written down Michael Lawson's 10:31 p.m. call, but they couldn't pull detailed metadata from cellular communications. Reanalysis found something new. A text message was delivered to Jessica at 12:15 a.m., 9 minutes after she had left work. Texting was also fairly new in 2000, and researchers hadn't studied it extensively. The message's content couldn't be retrieved, but the phone number the message was sent from was left in the files. It was a prepaid phone bought with cash at an Indianapolis convenience store, less than a half block from the hotel in Indianapolis, where Dustin Harmon attended his literature convention. This was the first concrete change to the timeline. Detective Washington said, "We now thought that Jessica had gotten a text that made her take a detour from her normal commute home, sending her to the gas station where she met up with somebody in the dark SUV." The group next consulted Geographic Information System, GIS, mapping, a technology only beginning to emerge in 2000, but now advanced enough to incorporate cellular data, surveillance video, timestamps, and physical locations into a rich visualization of movement patterns. This analysis showed that Jessica's phone had been active until 10:07 a.m., moving about 22 miles northwest of Bloomington before the signal was dropped. This distant region, close to Cataract Lake, had never been explored under the initial investigation since no leads had ever directed investigators there. And perhaps the most dramatic advance was when the group re-questioned Dustin Harmon's seemingly rock-solid alibi. Security cameras at the hotel in 2000 had caught him entering his room at 11:37 p.m. and not exiting until morning. But facial recognition software, paired with gait analysis, picked up on something the human eye had not. The individual who returned to the hotel at 8:15 a.m. walked differently from the individual who had entered the previous night, even though they were dressed in the same attire. The variation was slight, a slightly off balance, marginally different swing of the arm, yet human movement is distinctive as a fingerprint. Biometric expert Dr. Tar Nazir told the court, "Our analysis proved there was a 97.3% chance these were two separate people. This revelation suggested an elaborate deception. Someone else wearing Harmon's clothes had checked into the hotel while Harmon himself went elsewhere, returning before morning to maintain the appearance of never leaving." Equipped with these results, police obtained search warrants for homes linked to Dustin Harmon, a lakeshore cabin he had inherited from his grandfather in 2003 among them. This cabin, which was close to the location Jessica's phone had last been detected, had never been brought up during his initial interviews. The search of this home would provide the evidence that finally provided answers which had plagued Bloomington for a quarter century. Incredible advancements like these occur more frequently than you would believe in cold case investigations. If you're interested in how technology today is cracking decades-old cold cases, hit that subscribe button now. Our channel posts news on cases such as Jessica's on a regular basis, where advanced science finally brings much-deserved justice. Don't miss a single step. Join the group that won't let the truth remain buried, regardless of how long it takes. Dustin Harmon's lakeside cabin was searched under warrant at dawn on March 17, 2025. Detective Marcus Washington headed a team of 8 officers and forensic experts along the gravel road through thick woodland to the remote property. The small A-frame home, weathered by Indiana seasons, stood on 3 acres above a private cove of Cataract Lake, 2 miles from where Jessica's phone had last been spotted 25 years before. "We knew this could be our one opportunity," Washington remembered later. "If we didn't find anything, the case could never be solved." The cabin was nicely kept but not well used. Thin dust coated the furniture, and the refrigerator contained only condiments and shelf-stable foods. Most catching the investigator's eye was the atypical foundation of the building, elevated higher than usual, with a crawl space that was recently disturbed. "The soil around one section looked different," explained forensic technician Maya Rodriguez. "Subtle differences in coloration and compaction suggested this area had been excavated and refilled, potentially within the past few decades." Ground-penetrating radar, a tool unavailable to local departments in 2000, revealed an anomaly beneath the structure about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. Excavation uncovered a metal storage container, sealed and buried roughly 4 feet below ground. Within the container, kept safe from decay by the environment, investigators discovered what they had been seeking for 25 years: Jessica Mercer's driver's license, wallet, and car keys. Here's a refined continuation of your story, maintaining the suspenseful documentary tone. With Jessica's own belongings were plastic zip ties, tape, and a swatch of cloth that subsequent DNA analysis proved contained her blood. Most incriminating of all was a journal written in Dustin Harmon's unique handwriting about the careful planning and execution of what he called the perfect eraser. The magazine explained how he had used an academic acquaintance as his unwitting alibi, paying to stay at the hotel in Harmon's clothes, how he had bought a payphone to entice Jessica to the gas station, and how he had stalked her for weeks to chart her patterns. It was a confession and an act of literary invention. Washington went on to say, he wrote Jessica's vanishing as if it were a novel, casting himself in the third person as the professor and Jessica as the character who had to be killed off in the story. Forensic examination of the container and its contents offered incontrovertible proof. Advanced touch DNA technology extracted Harmon's DNA from under the container handles and from the pages of the journal. The blood evidence was a match for Jessica's DNA profile, derived from her preserved belongings. Most startling was a secret compartment in the bedroom closet of the cabin. Inside a false panel, police found numerous newspaper articles regarding Jessica's vanishing, photos of Eleanor and Rachel Mercer at search functions throughout the years, and even Lily's school photos growing up, pictures that seemed to be snapped quietly at public functions. He had been observing them, Washington stated, his voice strained with restrained fury. He watched over 25 years their agony as if it were a form of spectacle. The cumulative evidence constructed a picture that shocked even experienced detectives. Dustin Harmon was not just a vengeful ex-husband who committed an act of passion. He was a calculating killer who got rid of Jessica when she was about to reveal him. The journal discovered that Jessica had found out about Harmon's improper relationships with various feminine students, relationships which would have ended his scholarly career had they been reported. When she told him and warned him to relinquish all pretensions to custody of Lily or face her going to university officials unless, he started plotting what he had referred to as her literary demise. Even more chilling was Harmon's open assimilation into the community during the 25 years. He had been a member of the board of the Library Foundation in Bloomington, had given creative writing classes, and, in a cold irony, served on a panel discussion for unexplained literary enigmas during the 20th anniversary of Jessica's vanishing. Not sneaking around behind the scenes, said Dr. Elaine Morrison, the forensic psychologist who examined the case. He was sneaking around in plain view, spinning his crime into his persona as an intellectual fascinated with mysteries. He got gratification not only from perpetrating what he thought was the perfect crime, but from watching the public's continued reaction to it. With the evidence well documented and examined, the groundwork for Harmon's arrest was laid. The prosecution crew, headed by experienced District Attorney Rebecca Torres, worked with painstaking care to make sure the case was tight. We treated this like an archaeological dig, Torres said. Each piece of evidence, each statement, each piece of legal paperwork had to be treated with extraordinary gentleness. We had one shot at getting this right. As the physical evidence was being worked on, a surveillance unit tracked Harmon's activities. He was now 58 years old, and in the days before, he had retired early from Indiana University and was getting ready for a visiting professorship at Oxford University, an event that would have exported him from the country in weeks. This is the next continuation, still maintaining the cinematic quality and emotional tension. The Mercer's commitment became the tale behind the tale. Journalists covering Harmon's arrest made repeated reference to the low-key, unrelenting efforts of Eleanor and Rachel. They had never craved notoriety or publicity, just answers. But their persistence had finally rendered the case solvable. They turned their grief into action, Detective Washington said. Without their careful records, their daily contact with police, and their refusal to allow this case to die, we might never have discovered the evidence we did. As April 3rd yielded to nightfall, spontaneous vigils broke out outside police headquarters. Strangers to Jessica Mercer placed candles, flowers, and handwritten messages, a universal recognition of suffering by the family and long-denied pursuit of justice. Social media, several decades removed from the rudimentary message boards of 2000, exploded with sympathy and introspection. Posts varied from indignation at Harmon's temerity to admiration for the Mercers' persistence. Within the station, Harmon was officially arrested and placed in a holding cell. The investigators, though, recognized that the arrest was merely the starting point. Evidence had revealed him to be Jessica's killer, but to obtain a conviction, they had to recreate the moments before her death, how she had been abducted, and if other places were used. They kept going back to the lakeside cabin, using ground-penetrating radar, soil testing, and forensic excavation methods to ransack every inch of the property. One of the breakthroughs occurred when computer reconstruction of Harmon's journal entries detected a cryptic mention of the forest's edge, a place that had been mentioned in offhand notes in the 2000 police records, but never really pursued. Through the use of GIS overlays, satellite images, and historical land documents, investigators identified a small privately owned wooded tract surrounding Cataract Lake that Harmon could have used in 2002. Excavation started, offering hope that Jessica's remains, perhaps even her vehicle, would remain discoverable. While all this was going on, the Mercers collaborated with investigators, their insider understanding of the case assisting in the hunt. Each pin on the map, each photograph in our files, each interview we taped over the years became a resource for law enforcement, Eleanor said. We weren't reminiscing about her. We were assisting them to locate her. As the days passed, Harmon's public image disintegrated under relentless media analysis. Interviews with ex-colleagues, neighbors, and students revealed a man who had manipulated each social and professional exchange to preserve the illusion of innocence. And even with the growing evidence, Harmon was uncomfortably calm under questioning, an unnerving reminder of the calculated mind that had kept him one step ahead of the law for a quarter of a century. The arrest had shut one door, but it had opened another. Questions still lingered. What were Jessica's last moments like? Was there anyone else who was implicated? Could the recovery of her car be arranged to verify the timeline of events suggested by her phone's last pings? And how had Harmon been able to go about creating such an intricate fabrication and yet continue to be an engaged, respected member of society? For Rachel, Eleanor, and Lily, the arrest was not a conclusion. It was the first concrete indication of accountability in a saga that had taken 25 years. It was evidence that persistence, patience, and an unwillingness to let go would triumph over even the most diligent of criminals. Washington pondered the larger implications. This case illustrates the strength of pairing human determination with contemporary forensic science. Without the Mercers' dedication and technology we now possess, Dustin Harmon would continue roaming free, and Jessica Mercer's case would still be unsolved. And in Bloomington, as news of the arrest filtered into homes, offices, and classrooms, a quiet murmur of vindication swept through the town. Justice, long overdue, was finally underway. "I just want my daughter back," she said softly, her voice firm but beset with decades of sorrow. Everything else, the arrest, the evidence, the justice, none of it makes a difference if we can't bring Jessica home. Even amid legal wins, the Mercers' energies centered on the most human aspect of the case, recovery and closure. Neighborhood members continued to demonstrate support, mobilizing searches in areas Harmon had been known to visit, such as far-flung wooded areas and along the banks of Cataract Lake. Local volunteers, now representing multiple generations, gave time, materials, and skills, committed that Jessica's tale would not conclude in enigma. Prosecutors pointed out that the case would go forward regardless of Jessica's remains, stating that the combination of physical evidence, Harmon's elaborate journal, and confirmed forensic analysis created a powerful case for premeditated murder. But for the Mercers, the lack of Jessica herself, the possibility to bury their daughter, to view her return to them in any physical fashion, was an excruciating absence. Public opinion in Bloomington was one of surprise and shock. Few residents could see beyond the genteel, respected academic in their minds to the reality of Harmon's behavior. Local schools started including the case in lesson plans devoted to personal safety, empathy, and civic responsibility, frequently citing the Mercers' relentless efforts as an inspiration for persistence in pursuit of justice. As the fall of 2025 neared, the Mercers maintained their twofold role, aiding the prosecution while also staging community-based searches and awareness efforts. "We've done all we could to ensure Jessica isn't forgotten," said Rachel. "Now we hope the law can do the rest, and perhaps, just perhaps, we'll find her." Detective Washington pondered the larger lessons of the case, the strength of persistence, the reach of technology, and the inviolable connection of family. This case reminds every detective and every family that even when hope is gone, the truth doesn't vanish. It waits for someone willing to keep searching year after year, decade after decade. Jessica Mercer's 25-year-old story was still unfinished, but for the first time in a generation, the pieces were clicking into place. And for Eleanor, Rachel, and Lily Mercer, that delicate feeling of hope was both balm and reminder. Justice, long overdue, was finally within grasp. Here is your revised chunk with the tone and style you specified. I honored my vow to Jessica, Eleanor Mercer replied softly. I vowed to her that I would keep Lily safe, and did. I vowed I would never give up searching, and didn't. Now there is only one vow remaining, to discover where he hid her so we can bring her home at last. Lily Mercer Davidson, who grew up carrying the weight of a mother-shaped absence, yet built a full life and a career in medicine, spoke to the public with steady resolve. I've lived my entire life with a missing piece where my mother should have been. Finding her remains won't erase the emptiness, but it would give me a place to say goodbye. The arrest of Dustin Harmon and the expectation of his trial ignited something unexpected. A renewed emphasis on cold cases nationwide. Law enforcement agencies started re-examining long-standing disappearances, especially those previously deemed untouchable because they had appeared to have airtight alibis. The Indiana State Police started a specialized cold case project, assigning resources to using cutting-edge forensic equipment on cases that had lain dormant for years. Universities got on board, matching forensic science students with police to review stored evidence anew. Dr. Amelia Richardson of the Midwest Forensic Science Center described the phenomenon simply. Many cases that appeared impossible to solve just required the technology. Evidence that was mute in 2000 at last gained a voice in 2025. But aside from technology, there is a human lesson here. Cold cases do not crack on their own. They require champions. Detective Marcus Washington, who had been tracking Jessica's case for decades, highlighted the importance of persistence on both sides of the badge. You need somebody who won't allow the file to go stale, he said. Who keeps pushing questions even when answers are not possible? Eleanor and Rachel Mercer were that persistence, refusing to allow Jessica's story to fade. And it was that bulldog dedication that ultimately made a difference. In August of 2025, Bloomington paid tribute to Jessica's memory in a quiet, lovely way. A memorial garden in a corner of People's Park. An empty chair, bronze sculpture, represents absence and presence, a symbol of the lives touched and the community's memory. The university where Harmon had taught for decades created the Jessica Mercer Scholarship, which supported single parents seeking higher education. A modest apology for having unknowingly provided shelter for her murderer. Most significant to the Mercer family, though, was the establishment of the Jessica Mercer Cold Case Foundation. Originally funded by contributions following Harmon's arrest, the foundation now assists families through the emotional and practical hurdles of extended missing person cases in the Midwest. This case reminds us that justice can be delayed, but still comes even after decades. If Jessica's tale has moved you, take a minute to subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to bring stories like hers to light, stories that may otherwise be lost. Share this video with someone who knows the power of perseverance in the face of insurmountable obstacles. Leave a comment on which aspect of Jessica's tale resonated with you most. Each voice contributes to the consciousness that can bring real change for families still seeking answers. In our next show, we'll examine a shocking tale, another incredible mystery, a vanishing act from 1987 of three backcountry hikers in a national park. 3 decades passed before an old roll of film at last told what occurred on that peak. Subscribe now so that you won't miss this remarkable true story of the wilderness, survival, and dogged determination that finally gave answers to families who had long lost all hope. Some secrets are not meant to stay a secret forever.